The moment that shatters your life doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it walks right up the aisle. My name is Jacqueline. I am 29 years old, and as the director of operations, I spent my entire 20s building my family's luxury yacht dealership in Miami into a multi-million-dollar empire, only to be ruthlessly betrayed. The string quartet was playing beautifully when the music abruptly stopped. My parents and my younger brother stormed past the VIP seating and rushed straight up to the altar. Because they were family, the security guards hesitated just long enough for the nightmare to unfold. My father didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and delivered a stinging slap across my face. The entire venue gasped in horror. My mother began sobbing loudly, pointing a trembling finger at my groom. They said my groom was a mistake, and I was destroying the family's honor. My mother cried and demanded I leave the altar immediately. My father stepped closer, his voice a venomous hiss. "Cancel this wedding and sign the papers, or we will destroy it for you. You choose." My groom tried to step forward to protect me, but I held up my hand to stop him. I didn't cry. I didn't step back. The sting on my cheek only confirmed that my preparation was absolutely necessary. I calmly reached out and pulled out my phone. "You might want to look at this first," I said quietly. I held up the screen. First, a video of my brother blackout drunk laughing maniacally as he crashed a $3 million yacht straight into a protected coral reef. Next, an official email from our insurance provider with bright red text claim, denied due to intoxicated operation. Finally, an official notice of a federal investigation from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. 5 seconds later, the color completely drained from their faces. They were pale, trembling, and entirely speechless. Have you ever realized that the people demanding your absolute loyalty are the ones actively trying to destroy you? Drop a comment below if you've ever had to protect yourself from your own family's toxic manipulation. You won't believe how I orchestrated their absolute downfall, and trust me, the federal agents waiting in the parking lot were just the beginning. Understanding why everything escalated to that disastrous moment on the beach requires stepping back to the absolute peak of our business before the rot set in. The Miami Marina was my sanctuary. I practically lived among the towering fiberglass hulls and the smell of salt water mixed with premium diesel. As the director of operations, I handled every logistical nightmare, from clearing customs for imported Italian vessels to smoothing over the temper tantrums of demanding billionaires. I generated the record-breaking revenue that kept our luxurious lifestyle afloat, yet on paper, my father Vincent held 100% of the ownership. He spent his afternoons playing golf at exclusive country clubs, perfectly content to let me bleed for his empire, while he collected the profits and praise. The delicate operational balance shattered the moment my younger brother Troy was handed the title of Vice President of Finance. He possessed no financial degree, no maritime experience, and absolutely no work ethic. His only qualification was his gender and his status as the golden child. Almost immediately, the dealership's pristine inventory became his personal playground. Instead of managing the ledgers or analyzing the market, Troy began commandeering our clients' multi-million-dollar luxury yachts for unauthorized parties on the water. Worse, I started noticing massive discrepancies in our marina fuel logs. He was siphoning off premium maritime diesel and selling it illicitly to independent charter boats to fund his extravagant lifestyle, leaving our own high-performance vessels running on contaminated or insufficient reserves. It did not take long for the fallout to reach my desk. Elite clients began calling the office furious, complaining about sudden engine stalls in open waters, mysterious hull scratches, and cabins reeking of stale alcohol. Our reputation, the very foundation I had painstakingly built over the years, was taking on water fast. I needed undeniable scientific proof of what was happening to our inventory before confronting Vincent, who always turned a blind eye to his son's reckless behavior. I bypassed our internal mechanics and contracted an independent expert. That was when Bradley walked into the dealership. He was a highly respected Marine surveyor and a former Marine investigator for the United States Coast Guard. Unlike the yes men my father kept on the payroll, Bradley possessed a razor-sharp analytical mind and a strict zero-tolerance policy for maritime incompetence. He spent 3 grueling days down at the docks tearing down the engine blocks of the damaged vessels, analyzing fuel samples, and reviewing the onboard GPS and satellite tracking data. He cross-referenced engine hours with official records. His final technical report was a masterpiece of undeniable forensic evidence. It meticulously detailed how the engine failures were directly caused by the substandard fuel Troy had been substituting, and it mapped the exact coordinates of the unauthorized late-night joyrides. I placed Bradley's comprehensive report directly on Vincent's mahogany desk, fully expecting a harsh reprimand for Troy. Instead, I witnessed a masterclass in familial delusion. My mother, Evelyn, who had stopped by the executive suite for her weekly allowance, snatched the folder and threw it across the room. She did not even bother reading the technical data. Instead, she directed her venom entirely at Bradley, who was standing quietly by the door. She hurled insults at him, calling him a low-class hired wrench and a bitter laborer trying to frame her perfect heir. Vincent backed her up, sneering at Bradley's Coast Guard background as nothing more than glorified police work, insisting that a mere contractor had no right to question the integrity of the vice president of finance. They demanded I fire the surveyor immediately and use operational funds to quietly fix the damaged yachts. Standing in that opulent office watching my parents viciously attack a highly decorated professional for simply telling the objective truth, the blindfold finally slipped from my eyes. I saw the deeply rooted toxicity of my own bloodline with absolute clarity. They were willing to bankrupt the dealership, commit federal fraud, and destroy my reputation just to protect Troy's fragile ego. Bradley did not flinch under their relentless verbal assault. He simply looked at me, offering a quiet, steady nod of solidarity. In a family built entirely on lies, manipulation, and stolen glory, his unwavering integrity became the only solid ground I had left to stand on. The absolute limit of tolerance was shattered on a March night when the Miami sea breeze carried the heavy salt of impending disaster. Our dealership housed a pristine custom-built vessel valued at $3 million, securely docked and awaiting final delivery to an international tech CEO. Without logging a single departure protocol, Troy decided it was the perfect venue for an impromptu, unregulated ocean rave. He commandeered the vessel long after the dock hands had gone home. He possessed absolutely no maritime credentials, no master captain's license, no safety certifications, and zero legal authority to carry a dozen intoxicated civilian passengers into open waters. Compounding the catastrophic negligence, he took the helm while heavily under the influence of alcohol. Navigating the treacherous, shallow channels south of the city requires absolute precision, something a drunk, uncertified amateur lacks completely. Just past midnight, the massive fiberglass hull violently collided with a highly protected, ecologically sensitive coral reef, strictly within the boundaries of Biscayne National Park, causing irreversible environmental destruction. The frantic phone call woke me at 3 a.m, but before I could even dispatch an emergency salvage crew, the owner of the company had already taken total control of the narrative. Vincent did not contact the authorities. He did not notify the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission or report the grounding to Marine patrols, which is legally mandated under state and federal maritime law. Instead, he utilized a network of shadowy, under-the-table salvage operators who specialized in discreet, off-the-books towing. They managed to pry the severely damaged yacht off the protected sanctuary and drag it back to a private, secluded slip far from our main commercial docks before the sun even rose. By the time I arrived at the marina, a massive tarp covered the crippled stern, hiding the massive gash from public view, and my father was already orchestrating a deeply illegal cover-up. He aggressively commanded the remaining dock staff to scrub the decks of empty liquor bottles and party debris. Standing in his shadowy office, he laid out a chillingly calculated strategy to avoid the multi-million-dollar liability. He intended to fabricate a comprehensive maintenance log explicitly citing a sudden catastrophic mechanical steering failure as the sole cause of the grounding. His objective was clear file, a massive fraudulent claim with our corporate insurance provider to cover both the total loss of the client's vessel and the impending environmental fines from the National Park Service, should they discover the reef damage. He looked me dead in the eye and ordered me as the director of operations to digitally alter the maintenance records and sign my name as the authorizing official, validating the fake mechanical defect. He demanded I forge documentation that would effectively shield his reckless son from mandatory prison time for boating under the influence and reckless endangerment, transferring the entire legal liability onto my operational department. A suffocating wave of panic washed over me. I retreated to my office, locking the door, my hands trembling as I stared at the blank digital forms on my monitor. The weight of the situation was crushing. If I refused, the dealership would face immediate bankruptcy and my entire family would face financial ruin. But if I complied, I would cross a point of no return. I immediately summoned the only person I trusted. Bradley arrived within 20 minutes, quietly inspecting the concealed vessel and running diagnostic scans before entering my office. His assessment was brutal and entirely devoid of emotional padding. He meticulously explained that modern yacht navigational systems possess black boxes continuously recording every throttle movement, rudder angle, and GPS coordinate. The former Marine investigator outlined the exact statutes we were facing. Falsifying the digital maintenance logs and transmitting them to the insurance company constituted felony wire fraud. Lying about the cause of a wreck in a national marine sanctuary violated strict federal environmental protection laws. They are not just asking you to cover up a joyride, he stated, his voice a low, steady anchor in my spiraling chaos. They are demanding you become the primary accessory to federal insurance fraud. When the investigators pull the satellite telemetry, and they will, the mechanical failure lie will collapse instantly. The person whose signature is on those altered logs goes to federal prison. Not him. The horrific truth settled into my bones, freezing my blood. The fierce loyalty I had always harbored for my bloodline waged a violent war against my own self-preservation, fracturing the illusion of family forever. The familiar scent of imported cigar smoke in my father's office had never felt so suffocating and nauseating. The air conditioning was running on high, yet the room felt like a pressurized cabin moments before a catastrophic rupture. The corporate insurance provider rejected our initial incident report. Instead, they flagged the multi-million-dollar claim for severe irregularities and dispatched an independent forensic adjuster to scrutinize the wrecked hull. The walls were rapidly closing in on the dealership, and the desperation in the executive suite was palpable. When I was summoned to the top floor, there was no customary greeting, no offering of coffee, and absolutely no pretense of familial warmth. Vincent and Evelyn were already seated behind the massive mahogany desk, their expressions arranged into identical masks of grim determination. Vincent did not speak as I sat down. He merely slid a thick, legally binding document across the polished wood surface. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs of legalese. It was a formal affidavit of responsibility. The text was meticulously drafted to explicitly state that I, acting in my capacity as Director of Operations, had deliberately bypassed mandatory engine maintenance protocols. Furthermore, it contained a fabricated authorization log claiming I had personally signed off on the vessel's late-night departure, fully aware of its supposed mechanical defects. It was not just an internal corporate disciplinary form, it was a sworn legal declaration designed to be handed directly to federal investigators. By signing it, I would be legally confessing to gross criminal negligence and perjury, effectively offering myself up to federal prosecutors to completely absolve Troy of his reckless actions. Before I could even articulate my horror, my mother began her performance. Evelyn leaned forward, tears welling up in her perfectly mascaraed eyes, reaching out to grasp my hand with a chillingly calculated desperation. She unleashed a torrent of emotional manipulation, weaponizing every dollar they had ever spent on my upbringing. She reminded me of my expensive education, the clothes on my back, and the privileged lifestyle I had enjoyed, twisting those parental obligations into an insurmountable debt. "We raised you, and you owe this family," she sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Troy is the heir. He carries the family name. He cannot survive a federal criminal record, but you are strong enough to weather this. You have to take this burden to protect your brother." She was literally asking me to step into a prison cell so her golden child could continue his life without consequences. I slowly pulled my hand out of her grasp, the sheer audacity of her request freezing the blood in my veins. Looking directly at the two people who brought me into this world, I uttered a single unwavering refusal. The air in the room instantly ignited. Vincent slammed his fists onto the desk, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The patriarch's facade crumbled, revealing the ruthless tyrant underneath. He leaned over the mahogany, screaming that I was an ungrateful, disloyal traitor to my own blood. He threatened to immediately terminate my employment, strip away my minority shares in the dealership, and permanently blackball me from the entire Florida maritime industry. But he did not stop at professional ruin. His voice dropped to a menacing growl as he promised to hire people to systematically destroy my upcoming wedding with Bradley, vowing to humiliate my fiancé and turn the most important day of my life into a public spectacle of disgrace. The onslaught of threats echoed off the wood-paneled walls, but instead of inducing panic, his words forged a profound, icy clarity within my mind. Every ounce of familial devotion, every shred of daughterly duty I had carried for nearly 3 decades evaporated in an instant. I looked at the man who threatened to ruin my wedding and the woman who wanted to sacrifice my freedom for a worthless son. I did not argue, and I did not shed a single tear. I simply stood up, leaving the unsigned affidavit resting on the leather desk pad. As I turned my back and walked out of the executive suite, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, my heart was entirely cold. I finally understood that I was never a beloved daughter. I was merely an expendable pawn waiting to be sacrificed. Empires are not brought down by screaming, they are dismantled in absolute silence. Stepping out of that mahogany-paneled office, I did not throw a tantrum, nor did I immediately pack my desk. Instead, I drove straight to a nondescript glass building in downtown Miami to meet with Carmen, a ruthless forensic financial attorney whom Bradley had highly recommended. Carmen specialized in complex corporate embezzlement and federal whistleblower statutes, possessing a fierce reputation for dismantling corrupt executives with surgical precision. Sitting in her sterile conference room, I laid out the entire anatomy of my father's fraudulent enterprise. I officially retained her services, drawing a hard legal line between my personal liability and the dealership's impending doom. From that afternoon onward, I embraced the most difficult acting role of my life. For the next half-year, I played the part of the defeated, obedient daughter. I continued finalizing floral arrangements and catering menus for the upcoming beachside ceremony, allowing Evelyn to micromanage the guest list as if our relationship were perfectly normal. At the marina, I kept my head down, offering vague, non-committal answers whenever the topic of the sworn affidavit arose, buying myself precious time. Beneath that compliant facade, I was systematically stripping the company bare of its darkest secrets. As the director of operations, I possessed top-tier administrative clearance to our primary servers. Long after the sales staff and mechanics went home, I sat in the cold glow of my monitors, bypassing the superficial accounting software to locate the hidden secondary ledgers. Every time a night watchman walked past my office door during those late-night data extractions, my heart pounded violently against my ribs, but I forced my hands to remain steady on the keyboard. My father had arrogantly assumed I would never look past the authorized operational budget. I discovered an extensive shadow accounting system detailing years of unreported cash transactions, illicit fuel sales, and a massive slush fund specifically designed to mask Troy's financial hemorrhaging from the IRS. I meticulously downloaded gigabytes of raw data onto encrypted external drives, pairing the fraudulent numbers with the original unaltered engine maintenance reports that definitively proved the wrecked vessel was in perfect working condition prior to the crash. While I was quietly securing the financial paper trail Bradley was hunting down, the undeniable visual proof. My father's clandestine salvage team had physically smashed the onboard security cameras and wiped the yacht's local hard drives, confident they had destroyed all evidence of the drunken joyride. However, they lacked a fundamental understanding of modern maritime technology and satellite uplinks. Leveraging his former Coast Guard investigative credentials, Bradley knew that high-end luxury vessels continuously transmit encrypted telemetry and surveillance data to an off-site manufacturer cloud server for warranty diagnostics. Through a series of specialized technical requests and industry connections, he managed to access the hidden digital archive. He successfully recovered a crystal-clear high-definition video file. It prominently featured Troy visibly intoxicated, slurring his words, and holding a bottle of premium liquor, laughing recklessly while gripping the helm just moments before the catastrophic impact with the protected coral reef. With the forensic accounting and the video evidence secured, we returned to the downtown law office to arm the final trap. Carmen did not just mail a polite complaint, she orchestrated a devastating multi-agency legal strike. She meticulously compiled the encrypted drives, the cloud video, and my detailed operational logs into a massive, indexed federal dossier. The paperwork was bound sealed and legally bulletproof. First, she filed an official whistleblower claim with the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division, exposing the millions in untaxed slush funds. Simultaneously, she submitted the fabricated insurance documents and the true maintenance reports directly to the FBI Financial Crimes Division, outlining a clear-cut case of felony wire fraud and criminal conspiracy. Because Carmen acted as my legal proxy, the entire submission process remained strictly confidential, shielding me from any internal corporate retaliation. The massive gears of the United States federal justice system began to turn quietly in the background. Special agents started securing covert subpoenas for the dealership's bank accounts, quietly interviewing the defrauded insurance adjusters, and building an airtight indictment. Meanwhile, back at the marina, Vincent continued smoking his imported cigars, completely oblivious to the fact that the very daughter he deemed expendable had just handed his entire criminal empire over to the federal government. He thought he was entirely in control, never realizing that the invisible net had already closed tightly around his throat. 48 hours before the wedding, the atmosphere in Miami was as tense as a snapping violin string. The heavy tropical humidity felt unusually oppressive, perfectly mirroring the suffocating unseen pressure rapidly mounting inside the dealership's executive offices. The independent forensic adjuster dispatched by the corporate insurance provider had officially rejected the superficial mechanical failure narrative. The auditors were now demanding direct, unrestricted access to the wrecked vessel's encrypted telemetry data and explicitly questioning why the director of operations had not yet signed the mandatory incident report. Vincent, a man accustomed to buying his way out of consequences, could sense his carefully constructed cover-up violently unraveling. The looming threat of a catastrophic multi-million-dollar liability made him incredibly dangerous. Unable to physically force my signature on the fabricated legal documents within the confines of his corporate headquarters, he shifted his strategy from boardroom intimidation to a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. He realized that the only leverage he still possessed was the upcoming weekend, the one monumental life event I had spent an entire year meticulously planning. The targeted harassment commenced the very moment my bridal party checked into the exclusive five-star beachfront resort in South Beach. My parents ruthlessly weaponized their substantial wealth hiring aggressive freelance paparazzi and sleazy local private investigators to loiter menacingly near the property's perimeter. These hired operatives stalked the manicured tropical gardens, aggressively flashing intrusive camera lenses at my arriving guests and attempting to bribe the valet staff for our specific room assignments. My personal cell phone quickly devolved into a constant vibrating stream of toxic vitriol. My mother left unhinged 10-minute voicemails oscillating wildly between hysterical, manipulative crying and vicious, venomous curses demanding my absolute obedience. Vincent opted for a barrage of direct text messages delivering a chilling, non-negotiable ultimatum. He swore that if I did not deliver the fully signed affidavit of responsibility before the string quartet began playing, he would personally ensure my groom was publicly destroyed. He threatened to seize the microphone during the reception, fabricate vile scandals about Bradley's working-class background, and humiliate him in front of Miami's elite society, vowing to turn the happiest day of my life into a permanent, inescapable disgrace. Despite my desperate attempts to maintain an outward facade of total composure, the relentless psychological siege took a devastating visceral toll. I spent the agonizing nights leading up to the rehearsal dinner, pacing the cold marble floors of our bridal suite, frequently waking up drenched in cold sweats. The sheer unnatural horror of being actively hunted and terrorized by my own flesh and blood triggered severe, paralyzing panic attacks. Every time a shadow shifted past our oceanfront balcony, I involuntarily braced myself for another violent confrontation. Yet through the suffocating darkness of that familial betrayal, Bradley remained an immovable protective fortress. He did not let the relentless insults or the physical stalking intimidate him for a single second. He actively intercepted the threatening voicemails, temporarily confiscating my devices so I could actually breathe. Leveraging his professional background, he quietly coordinated with the resort's director of private security to establish a strict zero-tolerance perimeter around our designated areas, ensuring local police would immediately trespass anyone breaching the property line. He held my trembling hands in the middle of the night, softly reminding me that the people outside were not family. They were simply desperate criminals terrified of losing their stolen empire. The fragile fraying string of my endurance held strong solely because of a highly secure encrypted phone call I received late Thursday evening. Carmen's voice on the other end of the line was crisp, entirely devoid of emotion, and incredibly reassuring. The massive legal machinery we had quietly set into motion months ago had finally reached its devastating, irreversible conclusion. She formally confirmed that a federal judge had officially reviewed our comprehensive whistleblower dossier and signed the sealed search and arrest warrants. The FBI Financial Crimes Division and the IRS criminal investigators were fully mobilized, strategically coordinating their tactical strike for the weekend. My final grueling task was simply to hold the line. I had to endure the terrifying harassment, refuse the ultimate demand, and ensure the beachside ceremony proceeded exactly as planned. Vincent, Evelyn, and Troy fully expected me to break under the immense psychological pressure and hand over the signed confession right at the altar. I just needed to let them walk arrogantly into the venue, inadvertently gathering all the primary targets in one perfectly sealed, inescapable location. The metallic taste of blood pooling in my mouth violently yanked me back to the present reality, standing right in the middle of the wedding altar. The stinging sensation on my cheek was nothing compared to the devastation I was inflicting upon the people who had given me life. For 5 agonizing seconds, the lavish beachfront venue was trapped in a suffocating silence. The warm ocean breeze rustled the floral arrangements, but no one dared to breathe. Vincent's eyes locked onto the glowing screen of my phone, absorbing the proof of his impending doom. The video of the drunken crash, the insurance denial, and the federal investigation notice. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch completely shattered. The color drained from his face, replaced by an ashen, sickly gray. But his shock quickly mutated into a desperate, feral rage. Realizing that the digital evidence in my hand was the key to his destruction, Vincent lunged forward. He let out a guttural scream, clawing wildly through the air to snatch the device from my grasp. He never even made it past the first step. Before Bradley could even shield me, the resort's elite private security detail, already on high alert due to our strict perimeter protocols, swarmed the altar. 3 heavily built guards tackled my father to the wooden decking, pinning his arms behind his back. He thrashed violently against the floorboards, completely losing the polished high society facade he had spent decades building. Evelyn immediately erupted into chaotic hysterics. She dropped to her knees, shrieking and wildly pointing her manicured fingers at the security personnel. She threatened to sue the hotel, screaming that they were assaulting a prominent business owner. Troy, standing frozen a few feet away, looked like a terrified child rather than a corporate vice president entirely paralyzed by the sudden eruption of physical violence. Then a new voice sliced through the chaos, calm, authoritative, and amplified by a portable bullhorn. Federal agents, step away from the suspects. The sea of horrified, whispering guests instantly parted, creating a wide, unobstructed path down the white sand aisle. Walking purposefully toward the altar was a highly coordinated strike team. 2 lead agents from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, dressed in dark suits. Despite the tropical heat, were flanked by uniformed Coast Guard officers. The sheer weight of their presence instantly neutralized Evelyn's screaming. The elite Miami socialites and wealthy clients who had enabled my parents for years now shrank back in absolute terror, desperately trying to distance themselves from the spectacle. The lead FBI agent stepped onto the wooden platform, pulling a folded legal document from his breast pocket. He did not yell. He did not need to. His voice carried the absolute crushing authority of the United States justice system. He looked directly down at my father, who was still being restrained by the hotel security. "Vincent, you are under arrest. We are executing a sealed federal warrant for your immediate detention." The agent's words were sharp, precise, and entirely devoid of sympathy. He recited the official charges, each one striking like a physical blow. "You are being charged with multiple counts of felony wire fraud conspiracy to commit federal insurance fraud and severe obstruction of justice regarding a federal maritime investigation." At the sound of the charges, Troy finally broke out of his paralysis. He let out a pathetic whimper and instinctively took a step backward toward the ocean, a futile attempt to flee. A Coast Guard officer moved with lightning speed, grabbing Troy by the shoulder and slamming him roughly against the nearest floral archway. The metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed sharply over the sound of the crashing waves. Troy began sobbing uncontrollably, begging our mother for help, but Evelyn was entirely incapacitated. She slumped against the altar stairs, staring blankly as the federal agents pulled my father to his feet and cuffed him. I stood perfectly still, watching the authorities escort the men who had tormented me down the aisle. They walked them past the hundreds of silent guests toward the waiting convoy of black government SUVs in the parking lot. The toxic empire had finally fallen. As the flashing red and blue lights faded into the distance, Bradley gently wrapped his arms around my trembling shoulders, grounding me. He looked into my eyes, his steady gaze offering an unspoken promise of safety. I took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the fresh salt air of genuine freedom for the very first time in my life. I turned to the officiant, nodded firmly, and demanded that the ceremony continue. The wheels of American justice rarely turn quickly, but once they start spinning, they crush everything in their path. For the first half-year following that dramatic beachfront arrest, a meticulous federal microscope was placed over every single transaction the dealership had ever processed. The forensic accountants from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, armed with the encrypted shadow ledgers I had provided, systematically unraveled my father's extensive financial crimes. They did not merely focus on the fabricated insurance claim. The investigators completely exposed the massive illicit fuel smuggling ring and the deliberate systematic tax evasion that had funded my family's opulent lifestyle for decades. Vincent's team of high-priced defense attorneys desperately tried to suppress the evidence, but the paper trail was absolutely legally bulletproof. By the time the criminal trials concluded the following year, the arrogant facade of my bloodline had been entirely obliterated inside a federal courtroom. Troy, the perpetually shielded golden child, finally faced a reality his parents could not buy his way out of. Stripped of his tailored designer suits and his unearned corporate titles, he wept openly as the federal judge sentenced him to a multi-year term in a federal penitentiary for felony wire fraud and severe environmental destruction. Due to extensive plea bargaining and his declining physical health, my father managed to avoid a harsh prison cell, receiving a lengthy suspended sentence instead. However, the true punishment was the absolute destruction of his legacy. The court permanently revoked his commercial maritime licenses, banning him from the industry for life, and slapped him with astronomical restitution fines that instantly drained his hidden offshore accounts. The final agonizing death rattle of their empire echoed 18 months after the wedding. Unable to operate and drowning in federal penalties, the once prestigious luxury yacht dealership officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The federal government seized and liquidated every remaining asset from the commercial docks to the sprawling waterfront mansion. The staggering fall from grace hit my mother the hardest. Evelyn, who had spent her entire adult life as a haughty Miami socialite sneering at the working class, was forced into a brutal new reality. Stripped of her country club memberships and designer wardrobe, she found herself working as a minimum-wage cashier at a bleak suburban supermarket, returning every night to a cramped, dimly lit rental apartment far away from the glamorous coastline she once ruled. While they drowned in the devastating consequences of their own toxic greed, Bradley and I were busy establishing a genuine legacy built on absolute professional integrity. We relocated far north to the historic, picturesque coastal city of Charleston, South Carolina, leaving the toxic swamps and painful memories of Miami behind us forever. Combining his elite technical expertise and my rigorous operational acumen, we successfully launched a highly respected independent marine, surveying and consulting firm. We achieved true financial independence and profound emotional peace, enforcing a strict, uncompromising policy of zero contact with the treacherous people we left behind. We never provided a forwarding address, and we never answered the desperate manipulative calls from distant relatives begging for financial handouts on their behalf. Standing on the sturdy wooden deck of our new home, alongside my husband, feeling the crisp, clean Atlantic breeze against my face, I watched the morning sunrise with a profound, unshakable sense of inner peace. The agonizing psychological weight I had carried for 29 years was completely gone. I finally understood the most difficult truth about setting boundaries. Sometimes the person who hurts you the most isn't an enemy. It is the people who believe you will always forgive them. The value and perspective of the story. This narrative resonates deeply because it completely dismantles the dangerous societal myth that blood relations demand unconditional loyalty even in the face of severe psychological and financial abuse. The core lesson here is about the absolute necessity of establishing uncompromising personal boundaries. Audiences frequently comment on the profound satisfaction of seeing justice served not through loud dramatic arguments, but through silent, meticulous preparation and the impartial hammer of the law. Viewers often share their own harrowing experiences of being the designated scapegoat in a narcissistic family dynamic, finding immense empowerment in the protagonist's refusal to be sacrificed. From a personal perspective, the story brilliantly illustrates that true empowerment requires walking away from toxic environments. It teaches us that walking away is not an act of surrender. It is the ultimate declaration of self-respect. Protecting your peace and your future is always worth the painful price of cutting ties with those who only seek to exploit you.